Okay, today's going to be a great discussion. We're going to do a deep dive about the topic of seed oils from a different perspective, an entrepreneurial perspective, someone who's interested in data and research. And I'm not talking about my usual friend here, Tucker Goodrich, although he is interested in those things. We also have a special guest, Jeff Nobbs, who's the founder of Zero Acre Farms. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Now, Tucker, you also have an interest in what's going on in Zero Acre Farms. So tell us a little bit about what you have thought about this project and how you've been excited about it.
Yeah, Jeff approached me probably a year ago to work with Zero Acre as a consultant. And I think he sent me a couple of emails initially, which I ignored because I didn't know who he was or what he was up to. And I guess you had that issue with a bunch of people, Jeff. Who is this guy? And then I forget exactly how we finally got in touch. It was through somebody else who said, you need to talk to this guy. And then when I started talking to Jeff, it's a really interesting idea. And it's something that we really need. And I think we really need it, especially to come from somebody who's independent of the vested interests in the food business, because only such an organization can be frank about the situation of our food supply. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy to do this. I'm biased, but it's a good kind of bias. It's not a conflict of interests. I like to say it's a confluence of interests. Jeff is making something that I've talked about for years, hopefully be possible for potentially billions of people who really need to make this change a part of their lifestyle and their diet. So it's really exciting, but I'll be, upfront about it. I'm involved. I'm interested. I'm not, I'm not an independent person here like I usually am when we do these things.
I myself am independent, so I'll be asking both of you questions with an open mind about this product. But first, I want to get into some background with you, Jeff. So tell us a little bit about your background in your career.
My career started in technology, specifically in e-commerce and in software. I've always been interested in food, but started my first business out of college because I was bored and wanted to do a startup. And my father was an entrepreneur, so I always figured I'd follow in his footsteps. That first business was helpful for learning how to not make so many mistakes as an entrepreneur. But my passion was always in nutrition and in health. And as I got more into food, which is really the lead domino in health and nutrition, I got more into sustainability and the environmental impact of food. The two are so interwoven. After that first business was acquired, I moved on to actually work in food as a career and started a restaurant that now has a couple of chains in the Bay Area, and realized through that restaurant that
what's the name of the restaurant?
The restaurant's called Catawba. It's
okay. I will disclose that I have eaten there because the Zero Acre Christmas party was at a Catawba location, and the food was quite good.
Is there any seed oils in the pantry?
No, I was able to eat everything. It was really yummy.
It's a gluten-free, seed oil-free, allergen-free restaurant right up Tucker's alley. And
so you're a restaurateur.
Yeah. Sort of stumbled into it.
Why?
I learned a lot about food that way.
How did you stumble into opening a restaurant? That's
because
usually a hobby passion, like someone has a real passion for cooking. Do you have a passion for cooking?
I do. I love cooking. I love food. And part of the reason I love cooking is because it's the only way that I can eat food that I feel really, really good about, or at least until Catawba and at least until some of the other projects we're working on now. It's really hard to eat out at restaurants. And so I wanted to create a restaurant where it wasn't so hard to eat out and feel good, whether you were keto or paleo or peanut free, gluten free, whatever it might be. The weird eaters who have a hard time eating out, I wanted to create a place where they belonged. So
and there's plenty of those. You're in the Bay Area, right? So there's plenty of those there.
Oh yeah, plenty of those. And it was very weird when I was asking questions like, the chicken I'm eating, what did it eat? And is this wine biodynamic or organic?
It sounds like an episode of Portlandia there. Huh?
Exactly.
So you live in Portlandia type mindset all the time in that culture in Bay Area, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And so this is a good place to start a restaurant like that, but more and more people are starting to care about those things. Is my beef grass-fed or grain-fed? Are my vegetables
I see a biography
organic?
of the chicken that I'm about to eat.
Yeah, what was their first
life
name?
Story. Yeah.
Where are they from?
What's their truth, right? Tell me this chicken's truth. What's this chicken's truth?
Exactly. So we wanted to make food like that. All joking aside, food that was just better for you, more available. So that's what we did with Catawba. And it was really difficult to find a cooking oil while building Catawba. And
what year era is this?
We started Catawba in 2015.
Okay. And had you been following the anti-seed oil story by then, or where were you at with that?
Yeah, I had family that got sick in my early 20s and ultimately passed away from what I now see as preventable chronic diseases. That was the point where I essentially made it my life mission to try and figure out what makes people sick and to try and do something about it. So I started reading molecular biology textbooks, reading chemistry textbooks, physics textbooks, really trying to understand what happens down to an electron level when we put different foods in our bodies. And this is partly when I stumbled upon Tucker's work and all the education he's done on what happens when we eat seed oils, all the bad things that happen. So seed oils was always very top of mind for me in terms of something that needed to go. And then starting the restaurant, I realized it was really difficult to find an alternative to seed oils. And that was sort of the initial light bulb moment of, we just need to create something better than seed oils. Education's important. Combining that with a product that offers a realistic alternative, that's very helpful for making change.
So explain though the name of the restaurant.
Catawba is an island off of Papua New Guinea where researchers have found essentially zero chronic disease. And they eat a diet that's obviously seed oil free, no canola oil or soybean oil or safflower oil there. And they eat primarily fish, root vegetables, some pork, some green veggies, coconut milk. And they don't have heart disease. They have extremely low rates of cancer. They don't even have zits or pimples or cavities. So it's a very healthy culture. And the name Catawba for our restaurant was a nod to that culture and to looking back and looking at diet through the lens of evolution and what got us here when figuring out what should we eat.
Right,
is that the same island that Dr. Chris Kenobi studied with his comparative culture, population cultures?
I think they are on his radar, and I think that they did show up in his study. They're a classic example of a fairly close to hunter-gatherer tribe who see very, very low rates of any sort of modern disease.
Tucker, is that the same one that eats 80% of their calories from sweet potatoes?
They're
nearby,
not.
Right?
It's 94%, but yeah, they're in the same neighborhood, and they're one of the few such groups where a rather intensive research project was done on their health and comparing their health to Western people. So, without going down a rabbit hole there, it's a very interesting population because by certain measures, they shouldn't be as healthy as they are, but they are. So what's the difference? So I think, it's a great starting point for any sort of investigation into diet and human health, and it's a great name for a restaurant.
So Jeff, it's
a bit of a diet nerd inside term there, which is why I wanted Jeff to explain it.
So your background in technology, what were the apps that you created before, or you said you created tech products? Were they food related too?
No, they weren't. Food was what I read about in my spare time and during lunch, but it was a website called Extra Bucks, and we partnered with pretty much every popular online retailer, Home Depot, Saks Fifth Avenue, Amazon, eBay. This was back in 2005. And our members would get a cashback rebate when they shopped at those stores. That business was ultimately acquired by what is now Rakuten. And during that business, I basically learned how to actually run a company and hire people and have a business plan and that sort of thing. But I always knew I wanted to do something in food.
So you were influenced by seeing people and your loved ones suffer some diseases, some chronic diseases that you think could have been solved if we had a different food system, particularly avoiding the seed oils that we talk so much about on this program. Was there something else that motivated you on a personal level? Did you have health issues that you were trying to overcome or something like that?
You know, I've always been in fairly good health. I've also always been very interested in food. I remember even in middle school, not drinking soda because it had sugar and understanding that sugar wasn't good for you. So just making the decision to not drink soda, you know, like that. Okay, I'm just not going to drink soda anymore because soda's bad. Why would I drink it? So that was
disclosure
just kind of
here. I've been experimenting with introducing Mexican Coca-Cola back into my diet, thanks to Dr. Ray Peat and his recommendations to that. So I don't know where that'll lead, but it's so far, it's tasty. It's been good.
Well,
I haven't had that in a long
this
time.
I think this is
tasty,
a perfect
that's for
example of just how controversial diet advice is.
Right.
You know,
exactly. You say
everyone
one
has a different
thing and you
opinion.
think it's like a safe, we have found the scapegoat. It's sugar. And then you're like, no, you've ticked somebody else off. You know, it's seed oils. We've found the scapegoat. It's seed oils. No, you've ticked somebody else off. So no matter where you go, you're always going to have somebody say, actually, the secret is mushrooms. Everybody needs to eat mushrooms as their primary source of fuel. And that'll be a new thing in a few years, right?
Yeah, most likely. And I think you can't go wrong, though, with looking at human evolution and what got us here and what's changed since we went from being fairly healthy to everyone being sick. And sugar and seed oils are two of those big changes. You know, sugar's been around a lot longer than seed oils have, and sugar was around when people weren't too sick. And like Tucker mentioned, and you mentioned, David, there are populations that eat a lot of carbohydrates and fairly sugary carbohydrates, and we don't see the same rates of disease that we do in Western populations that eat such high quantities of seed oils. So in my mind, seed oils are public enemy number one. That doesn't mean they're the only problem in the world or the only thing in our diets that we shouldn't be eating so much of. Mm-hmm. But I think they're a lead domino in a lot of our dietary problems.
My background, I got into the low carb thing and the keto, then did carnivore and all these different things. And so I've featured folks in these different spheres for years, even before I got into radio. And I've come to the conclusion over the years that it's easier to tell people what to avoid rather than to tell people what to eat. You know, that's because, and this comes back to something I talk about on an anthropological level, is that human beings have an easier time binding together over a common enemy to purge out of the camp, a scapegoat, rather than to try to figure out, okay, are we getting this in or that thing? Tomatoes, are they in? Squash? You get into a long time of conflict and schism. But if you can unite people around a common enemy that's actually real, in this case, I do believe the seed oil topic could be the biggest threat to our health over the last century, then I think that's a more effective way to move people forward in action to, take change in their lives, right?
Yeah, and both are important to your point. It's not just about what you should eat, it's about what you shouldn't eat. And you can be eating all the right things, but then also be, guzzling half a cup of corn oil every day. And just because you're doing all the right things, even just that one wrong thing can lead to all sorts of problems. Yeah. So
what is your most hated vegetable? What is your most hated vegetable oil?
Soybean oil tops the list.
Why soybean oil?
Because it's very high in a type of omega-6 fat called linoleic acid, which Tucker could lecture on for 9 hours. It's a harmful fat when consumed in excess, and soybean oil is especially high in this type of fatty acid. Also, soybean oil is by far the most prevalent oil, at least in the United States, the most prevalent vegetable oil or seed oil. It's approaching 2/3 of all vegetable oil we eat in this country. So if we could snap our fingers and remove one oil from the food system, it would definitely be soybean oil.
What about the other oils out there? Corn oil. Is that a seed oil, by the way, Tucker? Is that not a seed oil?
Yeah, that's a seed oil. So Jeff, why try to do this? Did you get, it's kind of funny. I was discussing with David in preparation for this, that I don't actually know a lot about you beyond the conversations we've had in a ZAF context. So aside from your experience,
is Zero Acre Farms. I want my audience to know.
Yeah,
I don't know
sorry.
if we've
ZAP,
said that
ZAP
yet.
is an acronym for Zero Acre Farms, which is the company that Jeff is running now. What finally promoted you or pushed you to try and get this thing to work?
Part of it was an idea that if we didn't do this, maybe nobody else would. And it wasn't a company like trying to find a low calorie sugar or sweetener or trying to create a better low carb energy bar, that many companies were working on. It was something no one was even talking about. There weren't enough people talking about the problem of seed oils, let alone talking about scalable solutions to solve that problem. And I felt uniquely capable and situated to do that, having a background in restaurants and food service, also in CPG and packaged foods. I was with a company called Perfect Keto for a while, and background in technology. So I partly felt kind of this responsibility to do it, but also that I thought it was an actual feasible idea to solve the problem of seed oils. I've been strangely obsessed with that problem. I've always been the guy, that brings his healthier cooking oil to a restaurant and asks the waiter if they can cook with that.
You actually did that? What would you bring in?
Yeah, I'd bring in something like an avocado oil, and
did you make sure it wasn't laced with seed oils? I heard some of those are laced.
Yeah, I didn't know about the adulteration issues at that time. Maybe I actually had soybean oil in that bottle. Looking back.
and how often would they accommodate your request?
Depends how annoying we got, and how much we pushed them. If we actually brought the oil ourselves and the food wasn't already pre-fried or pre-marinated or pre-cooked in, a canola oil or something, then they'd usually do it no problem. But often they had already cooked it in some sort of oil, or it was deep fried and they couldn't use my little 2 ounces of oil to fill a deep fryer. So the success rate was maybe only 50-50.
Although I will say restaurants in general are pretty willing to help you out with those sorts of requests if they
know what vegetable oils are, which is a problem that I've dealt with. Yeah.
No, generally restaurants, they just want your money, and they're willing to accommodate your dietary requests. And
I've had people debate. I've had servers debate me for hours that country crock is butter, and I'm like, no, look at that. That's not. Look at the country crock. And they're like, no, that looks like butter. And I'm like, no, it's not. Just have a, But
I had a favorite restaurant I ordered from for a while, thinking they were cooking all my food in butter, and I found out a year later, butter was actually margarine, and that was an unpleasant surprise. And the thing with seed oils is, if you replace seed oils with something better, you're not making a compromise in how the food tastes. If you take gluten out of a food, or you take sugar out of a food, those are clearly taste compromises. As much as we shouldn't be eating donuts and pancakes and all the other delicious, crunchy, salty, refined flour and sugary foods, they're very tasty. So to give those things up, you're making a compromise. When you ditch the seed oils and use a healthier oil and more sustainable oil, if anything, the food tastes better. So that was something that was really compelling to me as well. There wouldn't be some massive pushing a boulder uphill to get people to make a sacrifice. It's just easy.
Now, this is a topic that I've explored with Tucker a lot, but I wanted to ask you, if we have some time here, what do you see as the key health problem with seed oils?
So if I had to choose one, it's how high they are in omega-6 linoleic acid. And Tucker, feel free to disagree with me, though we've talked about this ad nauseum, so I don't think you will. When we literally are what we eat. Every cell in our body is made of pretty much only one thing, and that's what we put in our mouths. There's no place else that the cells in our bodies can get their nourishment. So when we eat things that aren't good for us, those not so great things are in every cell. And in the case of seed oils, it's this omega-6 linoleic acid that ends up making up nearly every cell in our body. And it's not just the linoleic acid that's a problem, being in our cell, being more unstable. It's everything that the linoleic acid turns into. And Tucker has talked about this in the past. There are very clear toxins, not toxins in the sense that you'll drop dead in 30 seconds, but literally defined as toxins by researchers that and these are very prevalent in our body in modern Americans. And many of these toxins come from one place and one place only, and that's omega-6 fats. And these toxins have been shown, and these are toxins like HNE, different aldehydes. The most common aldehyde people maybe have heard of is formaldehyde, which is partly what's in cigarettes. And these sorts of
embalming fluid, of course.
Yeah, aldehydes are not something we want a lot of in our bodies. And our bodies are flooded with these different metabolites and compounds when we eat seed oils.
So Jeff, you just decided to whip up a batch of this new fat in your kitchen one day. How did that work? Walk us through that process.
So I wanted to bring something to the market that was actually better. And the example I always think of is electric cars and what Elon Musk did with Tesla, where if we want people to, drive more electric cars, let's say, instead of convincing everyone to stop driving altogether or take the bus to work, it's a much better strategy to simply introduce a car that's better. It's more fun to drive, it's faster, it's safer, and it happens to be an electric car. And that made a ton of sense to me when it came to this problem. How can we introduce oils, fats, alternatives to vegetable oils where we don't need to convince someone to do something that's better for their health, but make a taste sacrifice, or do something that's better for the planet, but make a health sacrifice? Wanted to just create something better, and came across some scientific literature and some previous research and even some previous commercial efforts of using a method of fermentation to produce oils and fats. So we took that and ran with it, and teamed up with a couple co-founders, brought on some amazing consultants and advisors like Tucker. And for the last few years, we've been working with this, and we're bringing a product to market called cultured oil. And it's funny because we had to come up with the name. And I can describe in more detail what cultured oil is, but there is no name for it. And cultured oil made the most sense to us. Cultured oil is a cooking oil made by fermentation. So to take a step back, what is fermentation? We throw that word around a lot, and what does that actually mean? So in the case of food, fermentation is when a microorganism or communities of microorganisms, also called cultures, when they ferment plant sugars from things like wheat and milk into things like bread and yogurt. So these microorganisms can literally transform sugar into other delicious foods, and things like lactic acid that gives sourdough its sour and yogurt its tang, into carbon dioxide to leaven bread and carbonate beer. So there are sourdough cultures, there are wine cultures, cheese cultures. Turns out there are also oil cultures. And what oil cultures do is when they feed on natural plant sugars, instead of creating yogurt or lactic acid or carbon dioxide to carbonate beer, they produce healthy fats. So we can use fermentation, use oil cultures, feed them natural plant sugars, and they ferment abundant healthy fats. We then press that culture, and that's how cultured oil is made. That's what goes in the bottle. And we can make it in a way that has a much healthier fat profile, significantly lower levels of omega-6 linoleic acid, similar to like a beef tallow or coconut oil, low single-digit percentage, high amounts of the heat stable, healthy monounsaturated fat, which is what's found in things like olive oil and avocado oil. And so we can create an oil that is liquid at room temperature. It doesn't clump up in the fridge when you make a dressing. It's extremely stable at high heat, and it's made in a sustainable way. So that's what we're bringing to market. And that's what we had to come up with a name for. So we're calling it cultured oil.
As opposed to unsophisticated oil, right?
Yeah, that was a contender, but we didn't go with that one.
So now you went to these scientists and they just thought this was a brilliant idea, or was there any back and forth?
So one of my co-founders at first said this is a terrible idea. And I had to convince them over the course of the next couple of months of conversations of why it was a good idea and why there was such a problem to be solved here.
Why did they think it was a terrible idea?
So I think what often happens in the technology space is technologists come up with a really cool technology and then go searching around for a problem, as opposed to starting with a problem and then trying to figure out what is the right technology to address this problem. And in the early days of talking about this, I was had not yet refined the pitch. And so I launched into why fermentation was so cool and why it could be used to produce healthy oils and fats and why that was so great. And, I think now I do a better job when I'm talking to others and, trying to get others excited about the potential of cultured oil. the problem we're solving. And you've seen this in all sorts of foods where people are willing to pay a premium for grass-fed beef over conventional beef, or pasture-raised eggs over conventional eggs, or organic vegetables over conventional vegetables. Cultured oil isn't the cheapest product on the market or on the shelf to start, but it's not too much more expensive, and it's just so much better for you. And really checks every box that we think when there's education about the problem and the problems that cultured oil solves, consumers will start to care more. And we hope, of course, that over time we can bring the cost down to be competitive with other vegetable oils.
Right. I think that one of the things, and I'm going to interject here and be non-neutral, is that having had lots of chats with Jeff and the co-founder he just mentioned, he's a very skeptical guy. And I think that's a fair way to describe him. And he's the sort of guy who wants to make sure every meeting that Zaf has that he's a part of, he's kind of beating the drum on, we got to do this right. And we got to make sure that we're doing this accurately and that we're honest about it. Convincing this fellow that this was a good idea was not the Jeff undersells it, I think, a little bit, the level of skepticism he was up against and the level of convincing this fellow required. By the time I met him, he was sold on the basic idea, and he still has a ton of questions about it, even to this day, and I think that that's one of the things that makes this a really compelling company, even more than the product, is that both Jeff and the other founder are dedicated to doing this right. Okay, I'll switch into pitch mode here. And I think that makes a big difference. And it's something that we should get into. I think it's a great product. It's a product that is in line with what industry has been doing for quite some time, trying to get away from these more harmful fats. The difference between Zero Acre and, say, DuPont or any of the other big companies that make seed oils is that Zero Acre can be honest about what they're trying to get away from, right? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I want to, since I'm the only independent guy here, I want to ask some questions. So what is the organism that is fermenting this oil? Can you get into that?
Yeah. So microorganisms that make up a culture that do the fermenting are bacteria, microalgae, yeast, or fungi, other fungi. Those are the microorganisms that make up most fermentations. Our product development focuses on microalgae and yeast. We think that those are the most promising. And bacteria can produce oils. Other fungi can produce lipids, which are the broader category of oils and fats. But we focus on those that make the right fat profile and make them quickest so that it's most economical.
And so it's a microalgae and a yeast. Are those two separate organisms that you're talking about there?
Yep, those are two separate organisms. Yeast is a type of fungi, single cell organism, and microalgae is is a single cell algae. And these organisms have been used to produce food for a long time. And
you're using both in tandem to produce this product?
We're using different organisms for different products and different purposes. And microorganisms are really just like any other organism. A pig is an organism, a cow is an organism, olive tree, we're organisms. We're made up of trillions of cells. And so a single cell organism, it has all the desires we do to live and to pass on its DNA, but it does all that with just one cell. And so if you look under the microscope of, if you looked under the microscope of pig cells, you'd see some triglycerides and fat floating around. And when you look under the microscope of cultured oil cells, it's one cell and it is full of oil. I'm talking 80 to 90% of the microorganism is oil. And so it's very easy to imagine, getting oil out of something that's 80 to 90% oil, contrasted with something like a corn kernel or the bran of rice or a grape seed,
or a cow,
or even
where
a cow.
much of our fat comes from.
specifically with the seed oils, there would have been no way evolutionarily to consume that amount of oil and those particular fatty acids. Whereas with cultured oil, we can have a very healthy fat profile.
So does the microalgae produces one particular product that has a different fat profile of saturated to unsaturated to PUFA, and then the yeast produces another fat profile, or is it a taste or texture difference between the two, or what? If you can get into that, if you can't, it's okay.
It results in a number of changes, from the fat profile to the subtle flavor differences to the physical properties, whether it's more of a liquid oil or a solid fat. It dictates the fermentation conditions, the temperature at which the fermentation happens, how much oxygen is available in the fermentation. So it really changes everything. It dictates the product. There are even fermentations that use multiple microorganisms, an entire community to produce oils and fats. And it's really fascinating. It makes sense in that when you look at the vegetable oils that are grown near the equator, like palm oil, coconut oil, macadamia oil, they tend to be far less unsaturated or more saturated. And that's because it seems that nature, whenever it can, it minimizes the amount of double bonds or the amount of unsaturation in a fat. So if it can get away with it, it will make its oil as saturated as possible. When it can't get away with it because it's a crop growing in Ukraine or in Russia or in Canada, like sunflower and rapeseed, it has no choice but to make its oils very unsaturated. So lots of polyunsaturated fats like omega-6 fats, because those make the oil in its cells more liquid. So
and we can less likely to turn into a bar of soap when it's cold. I mean, I know for fish, you see the same thing, that fish in the cold waters have more polyunsaturated fats than fish in warmer waters. It's the exact same property of the fat that determines the organism.
Yep, exactly. And fish tend to produce more omega-3s to, being in a cold environment as a plant and growing in the air, is one temperature. Being in that same colder environment and being in the water is a much colder temperature. So fish have to produce omega-3 fatty acids, which everyone has probably experienced touching a fish, and it's extremely oily and slippery. And so, that's how they survive, is an abundance of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, those tend to be good for us, whereas the omega-6 fatty acids that plants produce in excess, those tend to be bad for us when we consume a lot of them, which is what we're getting from seed oils.
And do you have to bleach and deodorize these cultured oil products to make them edible?
No, we don't have to. So the issue with most refining processes or bleaching or deodorizing is that you're subjecting oils with high polyunsaturated fat content to these processes, and polyunsaturated fats or PUFAs. So when you subject PUFAs to any sort of heat, light, oxygen, and air, they start to oxidize. They start to go rancid. They start to go bad. They start to turn into all these other compounds that we all try to avoid. And the same thing that happens in our body is what's happening during processing of any sort of vegetable oils. Cultured oil, on the other hand, because it's so stable, and we've measured this, and it's far more oxidatively stable than any other oil by far. In fact, it's comparable to something like a beef tallow. It's sort of between a beef tallow and a lard in terms of oxidative stability, because it's so low in the unstable fat. So when it's exposed to light, oxygen, heat, air, it doesn't change much. That makes it more stable through the process of actually getting it into a bottle and filtering it. And that also means when it's in your body, it's more stable and it's not as easily turning into all these harmful compounds.
So your product is not bleached or deodorized.
So those bleaching and deodorizing processes are actually cleaning up the rancidity of the oils.
Yeah, exactly. If you had, for example, a soybean oil that had been sitting out for a while, you'd probably be better off having that bleached and deodorized to get rid of a lot of those oxidized products. And so, yeah, our oil goes through not the same process. We don't use any harsh chemical solvents like hexane, which are usually used to strip the oil from the seed and then it requires a extra special and harsh process to then get the hexane out. So we go through a process that includes a clay filter. So it's like pouring water through a Brita filter, like a charcoal filter, and steam distillation, and that cleans up the oil, purifies the oil,
removing the organism.
Yeah, it completely separates the oil from the organism.
Can you turn the organism into a product, a little bar or something, a little protein bar?
You probably could. I think that sort of thing is better for other purposes. I don't know what the effects would be of replacing all of our protein with that, but you could. The thing is, there's just not that much of it because the organism is 80 to 90% oil. So there's not much left that isn't oil when you're done getting the oil out of there.
So we live in an age where Jurassic World just did their newest movie. So when we talk about organisms, how did you discover this organism? People are concerned about the words of organism and GMO, and I'm not saying that's what you have, but where did you find this organism?
I just watched that movie. It was good, very entertaining. So we're not creating an island of microorganisms for visitors to come see.
Eat jars of mayonnaise without any guilt, huh?
Yeah, you could. So the microorganisms that we're working with, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cultures or these microbial communities that naturally produce oil. We tested a lot, and we looked through a lot of the research and literature and previous research, previous companies, anyone who had done anything related to this topic. And we looked at what type of fat profiles are produced through these fermentation processes from different organisms. And we chose those that had fat profiles most aligned with what we thought humans should be eating, that are healthy, that are very low in these omega-6 fats and are high in other good fats, and also that did it economically. So for example, some of these microbial communities, they take weeks to produce sufficient oil, whereas some take hours or days. We have a preference for the ones that take hours or days because they're so efficient at producing oil that it ends up creating a much more economical process, the shorter time frame that is.
So has there been any modification of this organism that you guys have found to be the most effective?
There's no GMO material in cultured oil. So usually the issue with GMOs are they're genetically modified to be able to be sprayed with massive amounts of pesticides, herbicides, things like glyphosate. And they also result in a food that often people have never eaten before, or people are eating the actual genetically modified material. None of that is applicable for cultured oil. We actually have it tested to be glyphosate residue-free certified. So there's none of that in there, and no GMO material in the oil. And the only thing we do is we optimize the organism to make even more healthy fats faster. So there are small changes we can make, like I was talking about before, with the temperature that the fermentation takes place at, how quickly the organism produces oil. There are small optimizations that can be made there, but none of the issues that that you'd see in something like a GMO food product, GMO soy, something like that.
So there have been what would the term be? It's not gene splicing, or is that, I don't know these terms for, I haven't been to Jurassic Park except for the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting because for foods like an Impossible Burger or foods on the supermarket shelf that have been genetically modified, they're now required to have a bioengineered label on them. So if you turn over a package of an Impossible Burger or other foods like that, you'll see a big bioengineered label. Whereas if you just pick kale out of the ground and go through the process of packaging that, there's no bioengineered label. So with cultured oil, similarly, there's no bioengineered label. Because there's no bioengineered material
in the final product, but the organism itself that gets the final product has been modified, right?
Yeah, that organism has been optimized to do more of what we want it to do, which is create more of this healthy fat faster. But none of that organism is actually in the final product. And we don't do any sort of modification to allow, more use of pesticides or to create some weird novel compound. It's all in the name of producing more healthy fats.
Go ahead.
Sorry, that's a great point. So the world just went through a little experiment with trans fats that didn't turn out quite the way we'd anticipated it would. Let's talk a little bit about the fats that are in this oil. Are there any trans fats or any synthetic fats?
Usually when we experiment on humans by, feeding us something that we've never eaten before, new novel compounds, those experiments tend to not end well. So in the case of fat, partial hydrogenation and trans fats, and then for your audience that remembers Olestra from the 1990s, these were all completely new compounds that were introduced to our diet. With cultured oil, there's nothing new. It's just a very efficient way of producing a lot of these healthy fats, like monounsaturated fat. So cultured oil is about 90% monounsaturated fat, and monounsaturated fat is
what's the breakdown of the monounsaturated fat in the oil, the cultured oil?
So saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated, as well as trans, are sort of the categories of fats. And cultured oil has 1.5 to 3% omega-6 or polyunsaturated fats, about 90% monounsaturated fats, and the rest are saturated fats like stearic acid and palmitic acid. So in cultured oil, having a lot of monounsaturated fat means it's just about as stable as saturated fats, far, far more stable than polyunsaturated fats. And it also remains liquid at room temperature.
So the fat profile would be closer to, say, olive oil rather than butter or beef tallow?
Yep, that's right. It would be closer to olive oil with even more monounsaturated fat than olive oil, and up to 10 times less omega-6 fat than olive oil.
Was there a reason why you didn't go the opposite direction of having way more saturated fat proportion to monounsaturated fat, such as coconut oil or cocoa butter?
Yeah, most people that are currently eating seed oils, vegetable oils, or restaurants that use these oils, packaged food companies that use these oils, they've come to rely on having a liquid oil. It's easy to spray, to mix, to drizzle, to sear, to throw in a pan, to deep fry. At restaurants, having owned a restaurant and still owning a restaurant, it's very difficult to work with solid fats. Mm-hmm. Whether you're filling the deep fryer or you just need to squeeze some oil onto the saute pan, to wait for a solid fat to melt, and then it tends to have a lower smoke point, so it starts smoking. It's just not ideal. So folks who are already using beef tallow or butter, cultured oil could be a good addition to the arsenal if they ever use a liquid oil. Really, our product is for folks who are using liquid oils like canola, soybean oil, corn oil, even avocado oil. It has all sorts of issues. It's just the least bad of the ones that are currently out there.
Would the product be possible at the level if you had not modified the organism that produces this oil? Like, would have just been a more ineffective production process? Is that all that's like lost if you didn't modify the organism?
So with the product that we're bringing with cultured oil, what we really want in cultured oil is high monounsaturated fat content for the health reasons and for the culinary reasons, very low omega-6 linoleic acid. And to achieve that, the organism could naturally do a lot of those things, but we wanted to create something even better than vegetable oils. And that means more monounsaturated fat, less omega-6 fats, high oxidative stability, high smoke point. So certainly tons of organisms out there, they produce fats naturally. You don't need to do a thing to them. We're doing research on all sorts of different microorganisms where, we don't need to change a thing, and they naturally produce oils and fats that are great. For this first product, in order to get it to where we needed it to be from a cost standpoint and from a fat profile standpoint, a few changes needed to be made.
Have you considered rolling out a product that's produced by an organism fully natural or unmodified or unenhanced?
Yeah, absolutely. We're currently doing research on that.
Very good. So Tucker, what sold you on getting involved in this project?
Well, it's I mean, there's two interesting aspects to this. The first is when you're, I've been advising people for years to avoid seed oils, right? And the next question is, okay, so what should I eat? And it comes down to dairy fat. Lard is problematic because of what pigs are fed. Olive oil is problematic, and avocado oil because of fraud in those markets. And when you start looking at it from a planetary, so it's easy for an individual to fix their diet, right? And cut out seed oils and, get decent quality olive oil, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're poor, or if you're going to look at it from a planetary perspective, those things don't scale up, right? Olive oil is a very difficult thing to produce, right? The trees take decades to grow. It takes a lot of water to produce olive oil. And that's why the incentive for fraud is so high in that market. What cultured oil has the possibility of doing is making healthier fats available to the entire planet, right? Because it's a much more efficient way of producing these fats than some of the alternatives. Jeff can go into that a little bit. It's also potentially better for the environment. A lot of, dairy fat. I live in Idaho, a dairy producing state, right? This is the third biggest dairy state in the country. Most of the state is desert, right? So cows can roam around here, and that's pretty much all that you can do with most of this state. If you're looking to produce palm oil, what they do now is they go into rainforests and they clear cut the rainforests. And in the rainforests are lots of animals, right? Or if they're going to produce more soybean oil, they go into the Amazon and they clear cut. And you're doing an enormous amount of environmental destruction. And unfortunately, you can't really you can only up your production so much, right? So one of the main reasons that we use so many soy seed oils nowadays is because they're cheap, they're easy to produce. And, we've gotten to the point where for a huge part of the world's population, we're committed to it, right? Up to, I've heard estimates as high as 20% of the population or 20% of the calories consumed by different populations, including the United States, are seed oils. And you can't snap your fingers and make those go away, right? An individual can do that, but you can't tell the United States today, okay, everybody start eating seed oils, it'll be good for you, and have that happen tomorrow without having massive food shortages. So this is potentially a way of fixing that problem, right? Fixing, for countries like India, where as their population has exploded, their consumption of seed oils has gone up along with their chronic disease rates as they switched from ghee to vegetable oils. Vegetable oils are easier and cheaper to produce than dairy fats, even though they're not as good for you. So this is,
so the
a
argument,
really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
So the argument being made, Jeff and Tucker, if I'm hearing this correctly, and I think I've seen other people with Zero Acre Farms say this, which is we would love to just scale up ghee and olive oil and all the other butter and tallow and all that, but there's currently not enough of those trees or animals in production capacity to fulfill a transition from the seed oil amount that's being consumed to in the industries, particularly restaurants and things of that nature, to facilitate a transition to traditional oils that are already healthy and on the market, right? Is that the argument?
Yeah, we looked into this even before starting Zero Acre Farms. We looked into scaling up olive oil. We look into scaling up regenerative agriculture, beef tallow raised using regenerative practices, and it just doesn't even come close. It's not like it's almost there. It's like not even close. You wouldn't even break 10% of the supply needed. And that's if, for example, every cow in the world was used for its beef tallow and all livestock was changed to ruminant cow agriculture and all of that fat was also harvested. You still don't even you're at like 5%.
What if you scale up the cows, the other animals used for fat, the low PUFA pork, what if all hands on deck? Would you still be able to, I mean, I'm just trying to think through the argument here. If you could scale up olive oil production, palm oil, I know palm oil has an environmental concern, but putting that aside for a moment, could you replace the vegetable oils by scaling up the healthier fats, all hands on deck being scaled up at the same time?
In short, no, unless you really relied on palm oil. But palm oil. This is the reason you can't rely on olive oil, avocado oil, palm oil. These sorts of crops is they only grow in very specific regions of the world. So palm oil only grows within 10 or 15 degrees of the equator. Olive oil, only grows in kind of Mediterranean regions in California. Similar to avocado oil, only grows in regions with climate similar to that of Mexico and surrounding areas. So even if you decided you wanted to replace all the vegetable oil in the world with something like palm oil or olive oil, there's just not enough world. There's not enough land with that climate to grow that specific crop. With cultured oil, it's climate agnostic. So it can be grown literally anywhere in the world. Since
it's in factories that it's produced or something. It's not like in a land environment, like a
right. It's an enclosed fermentation.
Okay.
And as an enclosed fermentation, that could happen in Siberia or the Sahara. It'd be expensive to kind of keep the temperature control, but it could happen there. And so these other oils and fats, they just don't scale. And then when you look at something like olive oil, avocado oil, our enemy is not an artisanal extra virgin olive oil. That said, if we're guzzling tons of avocado oil along with all these other seed oils we're eating when we go to restaurants and we eat packaged foods, it's still too much omega-6 in my opinion. Avocado oil is anywhere from 12, 13% linoleic acid. Some have been shown to contain upwards of 21% linoleic acid. So if there's an oil we can cook with at home that has 10 times less, we should do that. Every gram counts when we're trying to minimize this stuff.
And what makes
it's a key point though. Like for olive oil, the natural variation is 2 to 20% linoleic acid, and that's before adulteration. And that can even be in the same type of tree in an area, just because one's on the sunny side of the hill and the other's in the shady side of the hill. So there's a huge variation in the product. And then you get into the unfortunate issue of adulteration, which is a huge problem in the olive oil industry.
So are you suggesting that a country like India couldn't go back to its traditional ghee and, palm oil and other oils in a transitionary intermediary steps to without your product to be able to replace the amount of seed oils they're using?
Not if they still have this.
Well, and not if they still have the same number of people.
Yeah, they'd have to significantly reduce the population
but don't tell that to Bill Gates, please. Don't give me ideas, please. Please.
Or but that's to remove all oils from their diet, which is probably not realistic anytime soon.
So I mean, it's important to note that humans started producing seed oils when the population was a fraction of what it currently is. In the 1800s, I think it was like 1.5, 2 billion people on the planet. Now we're at 7.5 billion people.
Yeah.
And one of the things that allowed us to increase the population that much and was increasing production of seed oils, because humans need some amount of fat to survive. Now we're at this point where we can't, there's no easy way to just go back to where we were before, unfortunately.
Well, so you could, I don't know. I think an all hands on deck approach to scaling up all these different oils would be probably a good idea. I mean, I look at some of those African countries, they have shea butter and they cook their foods in shea butter, and I think going back to a decentralized, whatever your community used to use for oil and fat would probably be something that we should all promote. So that it's kind of a decentralized, whatever local nut or tropical oil or whatever gets returned back to the, the food system. And I think that, that probably is going to be the best future forward, is decentralizing. If you live in Florida, then use oils that are local to your community that can be scaled up to feed Florida. Another issue would be that, you know, a lot of these foods that have seed oils and vegetable oils in them don't necessarily need them, do they? You know what I mean? Like you could, and theoretically, you know, recreate bread products and cracker products and things like that without those oils. And then, you know, add a natural fat or whatever in your cooking or whatever else to be able to accommodate a transition. The only thing I think it's hard. I don't believe, I mean, maybe I have to look at this further, but it's hard to believe that, like the world can't feed itself on real fats. I think there's a way that could be done. Not to say that yours doesn't potentially help tremendously to feed the world on healthy fats, but I'm just saying, I need to look into that more. I think that's a big question here. And
yeah,
and
whether a big question for us too,
whether it's yes or no doesn't mean that your product is not valid or anything. I just think that's a very big question that needs to be thought through a lot, because for example, I asked this to Tucker one time when he first told me, what about, you could reuse natural fats more times without them becoming, completely disgusting and toxic, rancid. That might scale down the need to, up some productions of other oils.
In
right?
port areas, people already do that because they can't afford anything else. I mean,
so they use ghee and stuff.
Well, if you want to really nauseate yourself, you can go look at videos of people retrieving oil out of sewers in China so they can resell it to restaurants because there's such a demand for these fats over there. So yeah, it's possible to do that. You start coming, as soon as you start reusing rancid oils, you come into the health problems.
I just don't want to get into these things because it's not a knock. It's just, I don't want to get into this thing that the whole world can't feed itself healthfully or whatever without this concept or this product. That to me is going to get people to push back on that idea.
Well, okay. That's a very fair,
because it may be true. It may be true, but that's a very big claim to make.
That's a very fair point to make. And I think it's important to note that this is not an idea that started with Zero Acre Farms, right? The industry has been trying to reduce the omega-6 fat content in their products for years. They've got, it's kind of funny. You go to the supermarket and you may see on the ingredient label a high oleic sunflower oil, for instance. Well, they found a variety of sunflower oil that is naturally low in the harmful omega-6 fats and higher in the beneficial oleic acid. And they've started using that in making foods because it is much more stable, much less likely to go rancid. So this is, stepping outside of the Zero Acre Farm universe for a moment, right? This is a problem that has been recognized by the entire food industry for quite some time. And they've been pursuing various different avenues to try and reduce the omega-6 content of fats. I found out recently that Mars, the producers of M&Ms, committed years ago to make all of their peanut M&Ms from high oleic peanuts. Right? What's the benefit of Mars from doing that? Well, it turns out that the shelf life's 10 times as long because they're not going to go bad, right? Now that has benefits all down the food chain, right? Not only are those oils in those peanut M&Ms going to be healthier, but because there's less food waste, right? From those peanuts being able to sit on the shelf longer, you're producing a healthier fat, and you're also increasing the amount of the food supply effectively.
Jeff, would you be able to scale up the product to replace vegetable oils without the modification of the organism producing the product?
Sure, we could. If that were important to people. That's an important question too that people are going to want to know. Because the question, the issue you're raising, and I think this is a very important debate. A very important topic. Can you feed the world with healthy fats as it is? I don't like the Malthusians. Okay, so I don't want to give the Malthusians any ideas. But that's why I'm cheering for your products and products to succeed. I don't like these people coming along patronizingly telling everybody to stop breeding. I agree with Elon Musk. You said you like him when he says we're actually going to have a population collapse if we don't
change the way we're doing that. So I lean on pro humanity side on that. So anything we can do to beat Malthusians is a wonderful thing for me, but we better know for sure kind of what we're really dealing with here so that it's all hands on deck. I think your product could be a part of the mix, scaling up ghee, you know, all these different things, scaling up tallow, scaling up regenerative agriculture, you know, all these things, all hands on deck is going to need to be the approach. It's a win-win solution kind of mix for everybody. But
yeah, and I think that that's extremely important. Is it doesn't just have to be cultured oil. You know, a big part of what our mission is just raising awareness around the issue of seed oils. And if some portion of that funnels to, you know, restaurants switching to cultured oil or consumers buying cultured oil, great, that builds up our volume. We can bring the cost down, you know, wonderful. But a large portion of that will funnel to people, you know, using regeneratively farmed animal fats instead of factory farmed animal fats, or using, you know, conflict-free palm oil instead of conflict palm oil. You know, little changes like that also matter. And so if we play any role in that, you know, that's definitely success as well.
A real thing that a lot of boomers, you know, because I reach audiences that are not typically listening to the health podcast sphere, right, with my show. And I get people give me feedback from different demographics who are not going to be the early adopters typically for a new tech product, right? But a lot of boomers, they love their mayonnaise. If you guys could produce a mayonnaise, you know, that's what, I know you're excited. I'm sure you've, but that's, Tucker's excited. He loves mayonnaise. But you're not a boomer, Tucker. You're like Gen X, right?
Yeah, I'm not a boomer, but I do like mayonnaise.
But you're wise beyond your years, so you're like a boomer in that you're older than you are aged. But
yeah, maybe. But yeah, mayonnaise a major.
There's some boomers that like to eat mayonnaise right out of a jar with a spoon. Is that how your product will taste, like that, like mayonnaise?
Yeah, mayonnaise sandwich.
Is that the first product you guys are rolling out as mayonnaise here?
No, the first product we're rolling out, cultured oil, is an all-purpose cooking oil, and that oil can be used to make mayonnaise at home, to make salad dressings, to make, you know, anything you'd use any other oil to make. That said, there are a lot of items on supermarket shelves that use oil, and there's a really big opportunity to start replacing those things with, you know, replacing the seed oils with cultured oil. And David, I wanted to, you know, mention the decentralized point because it's a good one. And what excites me about cultured oil is that same fermentation could happen anywhere. So you could do that fermentation in Florida. You could do that fermentation in, you know, in Africa. You know, minimize transportation costs. But also, when we're living in very warm or very cold climates, nature only gives us so much from that climate. So, you know, if you're living in Canada, or you're living in Maine, you're not going to be able to grow any tropical oils. You're not going to have any, you know, your coconut oil, your shea butter. It's just not going to grow in that climate.
Go ahead.
No, so you know, that makes it more difficult, and I think it's a new way of producing oil and fat. It's, you know, we weren't consuming oils and fats made by fermentation, you know, 5,000 years ago. That said, we were consuming animal fats, which are ultimately a product of fermentation. When cows consume grass, they're able to transform that grass into ultimately what becomes meat and fat and milk because of microorganisms in their gut that are able to ferment all of those sugars in the grass. And so that's a very similar process to how cultured oil is produced. And it's no less natural or real than something like cheese. You know, just because cheese is transformed from milk using fermentation, cheese is still a real food. It's still,
right. The issue I don't think will be fermentation. That will be, the pushback will be from people who are skeptical of, you know, genetically modified organisms, even though the final product is not GMO, it's coming from a genetically modified organism. That I'm not taking a stance for or against it. I'm just saying, I think that will be the biggest objection. The fermentation process, I think people, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe you've done market research, but that would say otherwise. But the fermentation process itself is not necessarily scary. I think people, you know, they drink their craft beers all the time. They know there's fermentation taking place in a lot of their daily products. But the idea of it coming from a genetically modified organism Is there any, let's steel man that concern. If we're going to be true marketing, ethically, what's the biggest steel man we can make about that concern and then overcome it? Give me some help here. If you were in the consumer's shoes and you're generally concerned about GMO and you've knocked over the objection saying it's not a GMO product in the end result, but it's still coming from a modified organism. Can you give us some examples of why, someone who's not on the inside of your organization should have no concerns about long-term effects of eating natural fats that came from a genetically modified organism like a microalgae or a yeast?
Yeah, I think partly it's just a nomenclature issue. The word we use to describe something like GMO soy that we consume or creating GMO foods that humans have never eaten before probably just isn't the right word to use to describe something like making cultured oil. Just because you can leverage biology and the magic of fermentation to do something innovative, and genetics are obviously involved in that situation, and you can do innovative things to optimize genetics, that's a very different category than traditional GMO foods. And like you said, there's just natural fats that are in the final product. And I mean, we were talking about cows and cheese and when cows eat GMO corn or GMO soy, the cow is still non-GMO, and plenty of people will still eat beef and will eat beef at restaurants. And that was also derived from a GMO organism, since again, you are what you eat. And if the cow is eating GMO corn, that GMO corn is actually now making up what the cow is as an organism. Similarly, pretty much all cheese in the US is made from with rennet, and that is almost entirely GMO. The reason that most people don't care about nearly all cheese being derived from a GMO ingredient is because, again, it doesn't have the same issues as most GMOs.
But the cows themselves are not genetically modified, right? Or maybe they are. I don't know. Are they?
I think it's fair to say that they are, right? Cows are domesticated animals. They've been altered by breeding over generations.
That would be.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm severely gluten intolerant. And when I started looking into why I'm gluten intolerant, what I discovered is that it was a hybridization with a weed called goat grass 10,000 years ago that introduced the toxin into wheat and barley that causes me so much grief when I eat those food products. Now, if you could turn around and, for instance, knock that amino acid out of wheat, that would be a genetically modified product, and it would make it infinitely healthier for me than the non-GMO naturally derived product with a genetic modification.
But hybridization is different from genetic modification, correct?
It's not.
It's not?
Both are a way of modifying the genes of an organism to introduce.
But it's a different process
traits.
that you do that, right? Because like farmers, they hybridize a different citrus fruit.
But the wheat example shows that it's not necessarily more healthful. It can be less.
But it's
healthful.
a different mechanism that's modifying.
You essentially get the same or a very similar output, but the process you use to get there is different.
Right.
And what you're left with is genetically identical, no matter how you got there. And humans have been using artificial selection, which is,
right.
Let me breed all the nicest and most docile wolves together until we get eventually like chihuahuas, the smallest, most docile wolves together until we get chihuahuas.
So why didn't you do that for this product? Just keep breeding the organisms until you created the hybridized version that would give you that similar result that you did with this process.
Well, that's actually also part of what we're doing. And, again, it comes down to a matter of nomenclature where you can get literally identical results, but they're all called different things based on how you got there, even though atom for atom, it's the same product at the end. It takes a lot longer, and it requires and relies on a lot of luck.
Have you done blind taste tests with boomers to try out your mayonnaise product versus others?
Yeah, I mean, you can make a really great mayonnaise with cultured oil. And
have you done blind taste tests?
We have, and it's significantly tastier. It pretty consistently ranks #1, actually.
And you're using cultured the same, if you're making a mayonnaise, you're not using the low quality eggs for the competitor versus, and then using your cage free free range eggs for your mayonnaise mix, right? You're using all the same ingredients except for the oil, right?
No, that's exactly right. Ingredient for ingredient, everything's the same except the oil. And then we've even compared that to then other kind of premium down to regular old mayonnaise. And the mayonnaise with cultured oil seems to always win.
How does your potato chip compare to Lay's potato chip?
Yeah.
Have you done a blind taste test on that? I don't want to. All right, we won't mention brand names because you don't never know about that. But yours versus the market leader, the brand leader. Have you done that yet?
So potato chips and French fries are kind of the iconic foods that everyone loves, and they don't have to be so unhealthy. That's the thing is, it's just potatoes and oil and a little bit of salt. Most people consider some nice roasted potatoes drizzled with a little bit of olive oil, a sprinkle of salt, put it in the oven at 450. Most people consider that a great side dish at dinner. Yet as soon as you cook that in oil at even a lower temperature, 375, at a fast food restaurant, all of a sudden becomes one of the worst foods you can put in your body. The reason is the oil. It's because it's cooked in these seed oils. So we can have really delicious foods that aren't so unhealthy. And often when restaurants have to change the oil, it's because the food's starting to not taste or look or feel so good in your mouth. It loses its crunchiness. It's kind of a gross brown color. It starts to have a very acrid, acidic, bitter taste. And so with a healthier oil, that also means a more stable oil. That also means better tasting food.
Have you experimented with reheating this oil, making, restaurant common staple foods? And does it hold up the taste? Is there any toxic byproducts that are produced at a certain point of reheating? I mean, everything has that at some point, right? It's not like a super oil.
We've done tests. Yeah. Even
like tallow,
all oils and fats. Yeah. We've done tests, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, measuring the oxidative products of cultured oil versus other oils. And it's a very significant difference. You look at oils like corn oil, sunflower oil, soybean oil, and they're like off the charts in terms of aldehyde generation. How many of these harmful oxidative products are being produced?
The aldehydes are the toxins that are produced.
Yep.
What does your product produce relative to those?
So after a few minutes of heating, like in the case of sauteing or something, for every other oil, you're starting to see aldehyde generation. With cultured oil, no measurable aldehydes are produced. After a longer time, like 30 to 60 minutes, you're starting to see aldehyde generation in every oil, but significantly less, like 10 times less in cultured oil.
Versus the natural oils like olive oil. How about the olive oils? How does it compete with olive oil or
significantly lower? Significantly lower. Yeah. Yeah. Olive oil still, like Tucker said, still contains, it's a very wide range. So you never really know what you're getting. But yeah, it's significantly less than olive oil. And
I want to land the plane, but I got two more questions that help give us practical insights.
But David, one point I want to make there based on what Jeff just said, I certainly think there are circumstances where GMO foods are concerning. Putting botulism toxin in corn, for instance, troubles me, right? But when you're worried about that stuff, you're kind of missing the low-hanging fruit, right? The biggest source of toxins in the American diet is from seed oils. It's not from GMO foods.
But Americans don't know that yet.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
Right. But you've got to be able to be accommodating to the natural concerns that the first early adopters to this type of product will have, typically because they tend to come from the spaces in which words like GMO are a cuss word, whether they should be or not, they are,
Right.
That's just the way it is.
And David, I think that's why education is so important. Education around the issues with seed oils, education around how our food is produced, education around what the priorities are when it comes to, like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, not only what to eat, but what not to eat and what tops that list.
Scientifically, is there any way to research whether there's any long-term effects of eating this type of product? Because it is so new and novel that people could conduct to make sure that, long-term everything seems to be doing okay.
Let's be clear about that. The production method is new. The food is not. It's the same fats that are in every bit of food that you eat now. It's not, that's why I brought up the point about trans fats before. There are no new fats or any new ingredients.
But have we ever
products.
eaten a product like this of
Sure.
fats that came from a genetically modified organism? No. Right. That's why it's new.
There are lots of foods that are produced with GMO organisms that are part of the food supply. I mean, they make beer with genetically modified yeasts, right? This is a regular part of our food supply already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the test is the last 200,000 years of human evolution eating monounsaturated fats and saturated fats and low amounts of omega-6.
Are you able to get into what was added to the organism? Some kind of gene from spinach or something? You know, it's always something strange like that. You know, let me give you an example. For, you know, like in the citrus industry, they spent so much time trying to solve citrus greening disease by splicing in spinach genes and pig genes into the damn fruit, instead of just actually learning how to nourish the ground and the biome that grows the fruit. That if you did that, you could solve the citrus greening disease way easier. So I have a natural bias against products that say, hey, we'll just do gene splicing. It's like, no, I want to get the holistic picture right. In the groves, we're not getting the proper biome. They weren't getting the proper, nutrition on so many different levels, but they were just papering it over because our current scientism era is always biased towards genetic solutions for tech solutions. So I have a natural bias against that in theory, based on my background in the citrus industry. So, I think it's something that people will naturally wonder, well, why do we have to do it that way? Is there another way?
Yeah. And like I said, we looked into every possible way that we could solve this problem. And this is by far the best and only way to solve this problem. Yeah,
I've got two questions to wrap it up. So one is, if you're a restaurant owner, a small mom and pop owner in Tampa Bay, and you want to switch over to the Zero Acres product, is that something that you can do economically right now? Or is it going to have to reach a certain scale of adoption before you'll have the price point down that a mom and pop restaurant could switch out their oils completely and their fryers and everything, and maybe buy your mayonnaise too, instead of, or whatever. I don't know what you're going to make, but like, could they really do that and actually make like a profit as a diner or something in your average American community?
We're starting with consumer and online sales, but I have a restaurant. We'll certainly be using cultured oil. It's not, it's not like it's 20 or 50 times more expensive. It's in the neighborhood. And for B2B, when we're shipping to restaurants, for example, the price is lower than with consumer. That said, it's not soybean oil or corn oil or canola oil prices yet, which is why we want to build up volume, start with consumer. The more oil that we're able to sell, the lower our costs. And so eventually we can bring it to that mom and pop restaurant. That's really our North Star. That's our goal, is how do we get this into McDonald's French fries, and how do we get this into any mom and pop restaurant so that they actually have an alternative to seed oils that their customers want, that's affordable, economical, that tastes really good, that is a one-to-one replacement. So certainly they could start doing that now, and it'd be a little bit of a premium. But we hope down the line it's not a premium at all.
And then my final question is more like a big picture. If you guys are able to succeed in your mission, and you start to really make a dent in the vegetable oil industry, kind of saturation of the market. I think people might have a concern about what's happening with so much activism going on in corporations. If a company like yours becomes so powerful for the food chain, that the food distribution, would you guys stay away from social justice or other issues that are, all this ESG stuff? I think people are really getting irritated with the idea of big corporations using their platform and using their market power to kind of leverage a worldview that other people just make me a product. I don't want to get involved with you preaching to me about this or that, or whether I should be eating animal foods or not. Would you guys stay out of that? I think that would be very big help.
Let me address that, because that was one of the things that I really found appealing about Jeff and Zero Acre Farm, is that there is an environmental story to tell here. And there is a, ESG, that's a big field. There's a big difference between trying to produce a healthier oil that is going to benefit the environment and benefit our health, right? That per se is an ESG product. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I mean, there are lots of companies, that are cognizant of their outputs. Patagonia really led the field. And then they got hired by Walmart to teach Walmart how to do a better job of, being a good corporation. I don't think there's any problem with a company trying to be a good company and trying to produce good products in a way that doesn't damage us, right? I think that's something we have to commend corporations for doing. And now that's my opinion. That's, kind of why I was interested in working with this. And I've lectured Jeff at length on that topic in some of our conversations, but he can give you the official party line.
Yeah, and I got to jump in a second for a 1:30 call here, but I would just want to add, we're a public benefit corporation, so most corporations are making decisions based off of what's best for their bottom line, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to do so. As a public benefit corporation, some people know it as a B Corp. We have a legal responsibility to make decisions based on our mission of improving human health and also planetary health, and that's a big task. We're very focused on that aspect of our mission. We're not out to solve all the world's problems. We're not going to be able to solve all the world's problems, but the problems of human health and planetary health, those are the ones that are really important to us. And we think we have a very interesting tool to do that with what we're doing here at Zero Acre Farms.
Without criticizing people that produce animal products and all that kind of thing, right? That's not.
No, not at all. Actually, one of the things we always say is there's room for everyone on this farm. Whether you're vegan or carnivore, we don't judge. You can eat however you want to eat. You can live your life however you want to live your life. But we want to offer a way out of this unhealthy, unsustainable food era filled with seed oils, and just at least give people a choice, give people an option, without having to make some giant sacrifice.
Well, very good. I really appreciate this discussion, and I want to thank both Tucker and Jeff, both of you, for spending the time in the podcast today to answer questions from a whole host of different angles. And I think we've covered a lot. So this should be the interview to introduce folks to what you guys are doing at Zero Acres Farms, because I think we've covered a lot of the introductory questions people might have for this product. So it's exciting to see what happens next. And people can go to zeroacre.com for more information about what you guys are doing.
Thanks a lot, David. Really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker. Bye.
Thank you.